First and Four, Scottish Eye presents new evidence on the mystery surrounding the death of SNP activist Willie McRae.
On Friday, the 5th of April, 1985, Willie McRae, a brilliant Glasgow lawyer and a leading Scottish nationalist, left his Glasgow home and set off for his holiday cottage in Kintail on the west coast of Scotland. He was never to complete the journey. That day, Willie McRae drove to his death.
The fact that if you make an objection, if as an individual or as a group of individuals or as a small community, you wish to make an objection at a formal planning inquiry, then no matter how much that objection costs you, no matter how successful you are in your objection, you will not be able at the end of the day, as the law stands, to recover one single brass farthing of your expenses. But one of the primary tasks of an independent...
Willie McRae was an extraordinary man. Born in 1923, he represented the Scottish National Party in 4 general elections and rose to become its vice-chairman. During the war, he fought in France and India, became a friend of Indira Gandhi, and gave clandestine help to India's freedom fighters. His career ranged from a spell in military intelligence to helping write Israel's mercantile law. In 1980, at the Mulwarcher inquiry, McRae played the key role in defeating plans by the UK Atomic Energy Authority to dump nuclear waste beneath the hills of Ayrshire.
Ladies and gentlemen, what did we learn from this inquiry? First, I hope that all of you learned, if you hadn't known ever before, that all of you learned that you don't trust the political establishment in Scotland or in Britain. And that's lesson number 1.
McRae was feted as the hero of the anti-dumping lobby, and in the build-up to the 1986 inquiry into expansion at Dounreay, that lobby was again pinning many of its hopes on his skills. But Willie McRae was never to appear.
We were driving round the corner on the bend of the road that we're standing beside today on our way to Skye, and we were hailed by somebody who turned out to be an Australian tourist who indicated that there was a car off the road and felt there was somebody in the car who was dying. And we left our own vehicle and proceeded down the side of the hill.
When you got there, what did you find?
We found a maroon Volvo facing back up towards the road, which had an SNP symbol on the front left-hand corner of the windscreen, and to my amazement it was Willie McRae, somebody who I had known personally for many years.
David Coates knew Willie McRae because he was a member of the same party. Coates was, and still is, an SNP councillor in Dundee. A passenger in Coates' car was a doctor, Dorothy Messer.
The only injury I could see was a wound on the right temple, the right-hand side of his head. There was blood matted in his hair, and some blood had dried on the side of his face, you know, where it had run down. That was the only thing I could find.
No signs of other scratches or bruising or
No,
anything?
no.
Was there anything around the car?
I wasn't really looking, but David Coates came down to the car, and when he looked around he found some papers torn up, slightly uphill from the car.
It was all from a Kyle Welsh garage with Mr McRae's name on it, which clearly proved to the police that we had acknowledged that it was Willie McRae in the car. There was his watch, and there were some pieces of paper ripped up, and there may have been a credit card, but I wouldn't swear by that.
And how far from the car was this pan?
Certainly 20 or 25 feet, going back northeasterly towards Lay-by. In fact, the direction the car was facing between the car and the road.
As if it had been placed there deliberately?
Well, I wouldn't like to say why it was there, but it was, you know, it was there, and it was in a tidy, compact bundle. It wasn't as if the paper was flying all over the place. It was... somebody had put it there.
The next week, the papers carried the news. McRae had been in a coma for more than 8 hours before being found on Saturday morning. He never regained consciousness and died in hospital early on Sunday. The Inverness Procurator Fiscal, Thomas Aitchison, the official who must, under Scots law, investigate all sudden deaths, issued a statement.
The death has been fully investigated. There is no suspicious circumstances in this case.
Those words, however ungrammatical, may come back to haunt the authorities. A few weeks later, McRae's death certificate was lodged at Register House. It contained surprising news. According to the official report, McRae had died of a gunshot wound to his head. The scenario painted by the authorities was simple. McRae was known to carry an unlicensed .22 revolver. That night, he drove while drunk and crashed. In a fit of remorse, he was already facing a second drink driving charge. He turned his gun on himself.
What was your reaction when it was said that he had committed suicide?
I just couldn't believe it. My wife and I were absolutely astounded at this suggestion. We decided that we should, off our own bat, ask the right authorities for a proper investigation to be done into it.
I knew he wouldn't have done. He couldn't have done it. That wasn't Willie, and everything was going well for Willie, and he was the sort of man he was a very caring person, and he got a great many responsibilities that he took on as personal responsibilities to do with friends and clients and whatnot. And Willie McRae wasn't the sort of man that would actually push that aside and kill himself without making preparation beforehand.
Willie had so many plans ahead of what he was going to do, and he was such a grand fellow, and I refused to see he did not commit suicide. I'm convinced that Willie was murdered.
Following McRae's death, there were persistent demands for a fatal accident inquiry, but all were refused. It is a supreme irony that a Scottish patriot such as McRae was denied an inquiry which in England and Wales would have been mandatory. Instead, on the 1st of July that year, the then Lord Advocate, Lord Cameron of Lochbroom, issued a statement.
There are no circumstances to warrant criminal proceedings. The results of the Procurator Fiscal's full investigation have been disclosed to the next of kin. His brother has expressed his satisfaction with the extent of that investigation and has no wish for a public inquiry.
It was just a few days before he died. He was very cock-a-hoop because he reckoned that he'd found something. He was involved, or going to be involved in an inquiry into the nuclear industry appertaining to Scotland. And he said that he'd now got something that they wouldn't be able to wriggle out of. And he really was, he could be like that, you know, quite devilish. And he slapped the table and he was delighted, that quite definite that he'd found something, and or he'd got some evidence that they wouldn't be able to wriggle out of.
At the same time, McRae expressed deep concern over the death of Hilda Murrell, who was murdered in mysterious circumstances some months earlier. She too had been preparing a case against nuclear expansion, in her case at Sizewell. It has since been claimed her death came during a bungled break-in at her Shrewsbury home by the security services. But there was another parallel with the Murrell case. Before McRae died, his holiday home in Kintail was broken into. The same thing had happened at Murrell's holiday home in Wales, shortly before she was murdered.
I don't think anything that mattered at all was taken. Willie did mention it to me because, again, he was quite gleeful over it. His words to me were, they didn't get what they were looking for.
After McRae's death, a society was set up to honour his name. Every year they mount a memorial ceremony at a cairn erected in his honour. The society is led by an old friend of McRae's, Michael Strathern.
Was Willie McRae a man with enemies?
All great people have enemies. Whether your name is Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Jean Jaurès or Christ, all great people have enemies. I should say the establishment in the country was an enemy of Willie McRae. There were the drug dealers who had bases in his home territory up in the northwest, and he was on to them, as they say.
The northwest coast of Scotland was, and still is, one of the key drug routes into Britain. It's a multi-million-pound trade, which some believe is linked to gun-running operations. A few months before he died, McRae had taken up the case of two Dorney men who, frustrated at what they saw as official inaction on widespread local drug peddling, had been involved in an incident with two local dealers.
Willie McRae offered to represent us in court, and he was very pleased to do it, and he showed a great bit of interest. And the more the case went on, I got an impression that Willie was into something bigger.
You think he could have been about to nail the big suppliers?
Well, give me that impression, yes. Yeah.
So McRae's anti-nuclear and anti-drug activities may have made him enemies, particularly if he had information on the suppliers. But there were other aspects of his work which would have made him unpopular in some quarters. Willie McRae had a long association with militant groupings within the nationalist movement. He was associated for a time with an early version of Síl na Gael, or Seed of the Gael, which was later expelled from the SNP because of its militaristic style. It was at that time that McRae met two enthusiastic activists, Adam Busby and David Dinsmore. Both Busby and Dinsmore later became involved in paramilitary activity. In 1983, they fled to Dublin, where they were arrested on minor charges and held in Mountjoy jail. Britain attempted to extradite Busby and failed. Dinsmore, facing bombing charges, went on the run. Scottish Eye spoke to Adam Busby, a leading figure in the Scottish National Liberation Army.
Was Willie McRae involved in the SNLA?
He was involved from February 1983 onwards. His first involvement was in the attack, the letter bomb attack on the city chambers in Glasgow. This coincided with the visit of Princess Diana, and the letter bomb exploded inside the city chambers, and it cast a shadow over the royal visit. It was a great propaganda coup for us.
What was his role?
His role was fairly minor. He allowed us to use his office, and we were there on various mornings. We were trying to discover the times of various mail deliveries within Glasgow. We actually followed postmen and so forth.
Coulport military base was the next target. Busby claims that McRae approached them with a proposal that they plant two unprimed bombs on approach roads used by nuclear convoys.
The bombs, they weren't inert devices, they weren't hoaxes, they were actual bombs, but the timers weren't set because we didn't want the bombs to go off. We just wanted to draw people's attention to the fact that these convoys could be attacked, and they were therefore a risk to the public.
Did Willie McRae's involvement continue beyond that date?
It did continue beyond that date. He was associated with our escape from Scotland in 1983. He helped to plan the thing. It was very skillfully done, and he helped to finance it.
He was no terrorist. He didn't need to use terror. He used the power of his eloquence, the power of truth, to know the man, make the situation utterly laughable.
Willie actually was the kindest of people, and he was also a bit of a sucker. He couldn't refuse a plea for help. And at different levels, you know, sometimes it was just very ordinary things. But anybody who went to Willie McRae, no matter how misguided they might be, he would have helped them probably wouldn't have charged them, probably would have told them what fools they were and everything else, but he would have helped them, and I don't think there would have ever been any necessity for any involvement by him before he'd have helped them. That was just Willie.
The fact remains that if McRae was even suspected of being involved with SNLA activity, then he is certainly likely to have been under surveillance. In fact, there are suggestions he was watched long before any alleged involvement with the SNLA.
But he knew he had been under surveillance, but he just didn't care, and he kept on doing his work.
Dinsmore too has claimed McRae was being watched. His words are read by an actor.
I then left McRae's office and saw a car which resembled one used by Special Branch in the immediate vicinity. It was a small light blue car with a black vinyl top, a Triumph I believe, and contained two men who were obviously watching me. It was almost certainly the Special Branch vehicle BGS 425S. When I reached George Square with Adam, I spotted another Special Branch vehicle, a PSG 136X.
Scottish Eye has investigated ownership of these cars. One was a blocked car on the police national computer, the other has a false number. In fact, we have established that both were Special Branch cars based in Strathclyde. Dinsmore went on to claim that McRae had also told him of being followed to his holiday home by a brown car, registration number XSJ 432T. Scottish Eye has established that that car was a brown Chrysler owned and operated by the Special Branch in Strathclyde and later sold to a man in Telford. So was McRae followed on the day of his shooting? All we have to go on is what was found the next day and the official story. On the 11th of April 1990, the new Lord Advocate, Lord Fraser of Carmiley, issued another statement deploring the
continuing ill-founded speculation and discussion of increasingly fanciful and bizarre theories.
He said that although 2 bullets had been fired, only 1 was found. McRae had died from a single gunshot wound, and that the muzzle had been placed firmly against the skin. But there is some argument for the suicide theory. McRae was a brilliant, kind and passionate man, but he was also capable of deep depression. Another drink-driving charge could have meant jail. He was also a supporter of Exit, the voluntary euthanasia society. Although seized on by some as proof of McRae's suicidal intentions, Exit itself takes a different view.
The circumstances rather suggest to me that he didn't commit suicide. A member of our society, if they did choose self-deliverance, would, I think, and from the information that we give them, would choose a method that's both peaceful and also sure. I mean, using a .22 caliber gun, according to the experts, is a means which is more likely to inflict severe injury, but not kill oneself with. I certainly can't see that as a rational person, which is the type of person that joins our society, he would choose such an unreliable and such a messy way of trying to kill himself. It makes no sense at all.
In his 1990 statement, the Lord Advocate continued,
"The revolver was recovered by police on the 7th of April 1985 from a burn directly below where the driver's door of the car had been. I wish further to emphasize the position of the gun when recovered. It was not found some distance from Mr. McRae's car, as has been reported."
I remember an interview in Dundee with a deputy fiscal who was interviewing me on behalf of Mr. Aitchison at that time, in 1986, I think. And that was after the investigation was reopened, remember, due to public pressure. I remember him telling me that one of the crosses on a particular photograph was where the gun was found, and that was some way south of the car, facing towards Lochline itself. On top of that, you've got to remember that when we were removing McRae's body from the car, the policeman's hat tumbled into the burn below the driver's door, and I retrieved that hat personally. And if the gun was found directly below the car, then I certainly didn't see it. I wasn't looking for it, obviously, because we thought it was a simple car crash. But there were 6 or 7 people there that day, and I dare say there were innumerable members of the constabulary there later on that day. We found him at 10:30. So if you're trying to tell me that all these people couldn't have seen the gun before 10:30 the next morning, that takes some believing.
And you're more inclined to believe the evidence of the photograph shown to you by the Procurator Fiscal's assistant, which showed the gun, or the position of the gun, as being somewhat 20, 30, 40 yards away?
I've no reason to doubt it. I mean, neither he nor I are in the game to make up stories about where the gun was found, and I distinctly remember that part.
2.2 pistols are not a terribly powerful gun, but even a powerful gun, after it was fired, would simply drop to the ground.
So if a gun was found a considerable distance away, it would have had to have been taken or thrown?
I would have thought so, yes.
And if the person who had done it was brain dead and could not throw it, could you think of an explanation?
I can't think of any explanation other than that some other party must have been involved.
Scottish Eye has spoken to a senior police source central to the investigation. He claims that McRae shot himself while driving along the road. He says the car then spun off at speed and rolled several times, during which the gun fell out. That contradicts the Lord Advocate's implied scenario that McRae crashed while drunk, then shot himself and dropped the gun. But it does appear to support the suicide theory. Or does it? If McRae was brain dead when he left the road, how did the pile of papers come to be some 20 feet from the car?
Well, I wouldn't like to say why it was there, but it was, it was there, and it was in a tidy, compact bundle. It wasn't as if the paper was flying all over the place. It was... somebody had put it there.
And if he shot himself after the car had crashed, how did the gun apparently come to be some considerable distance away? But perhaps the most significant question is this. We know from his friends he left Glasgow in a ebullient mood. It does not seem he intended to kill himself then. So why was he carrying a gun in the first place? What was he frightened of? There is also an argument about the site of the incident. Michael Strathern and Peter Finlay say it took place where stands the official cairn. Coates disagrees. He maintains it took place more than a mile to the southeast. The confusion over the site matters. Coates' site is here, a few hundred yards south of the border between the Lochaber and Inverness districts. And different districts mean different sets of legal authorities. According to those authorities, the car was found about 25 yards off the road at the site marked by the official cairn. But Coates insists the car was much further from the road. We contacted Alan Crowe, the Australian tourist first on the scene. A completely independent witness, indeed he was unaware that McRae had been shot until we told him, he says the Volvo was more than 100 yards off the road and he needed to use his binoculars to look at it. Significantly, he also says that the tyre marks indicated that the car had not left the road at speed. As if the story was not bizarre enough, Scottish Eye has spoken to two breakdown truck operators, one based in Fort Augustus and one based in Inverness. Both separately insist that it was their company which recovered the maroon Volvo belonging to McRae. Debris collected by Michael Strathern on his site includes a radiator grille. Yet another close friend of McRae, who did not want to appear in this programme, also collected debris, including a radiator grille. So now we have no less than 2 sites, 2 breakdown trucks, and 2 sets of debris. We asked Northern Constabulary if there had, by some extraordinary coincidence, been a second accident involving a maroon Volvo in the area. They declined to answer. 2 years after McRae's death, the Scottish National Party asked its president, Winnie Ewing MEP, herself a respected lawyer, to conduct an inquiry into the death of its former vice-chair. Her investigations took a year, but persistent requests for access to Crown Office files were denied. Eventually, in her final report, Mrs. Ewing concluded,
I regret I cannot, as I hoped, say to the National Executive Council that I am satisfied that Willie did commit suicide.
Willie McRae died on Sunday the 7th of April 1985. In life, this remarkable man attracted fierce loyalty and fierce enmity. In death, he still creates controversy. But for his friends, the questions remain.
I don't know whether the peculiar things happened before Willie was shot or whether they happened after Willie was shot, but it just doesn't add up. And I'm surprised that police and inquiries and everybody else have accepted this, you know, as somebody committing suicide. Oh, no, it's all wrong, totally wrong, the whole situation.